Good afternoon. I'm honored to be joined by this exceptional group of individuals and of course saddened by what brings us together. You've heard a little bit about my family in the prior panel. The way in which survivors and victims respond to an act of hate is often thought to be some type of action to counter what happened. As someone whose family has forever been changed by the act of a white supremacist, I sometimes feel that I am not doing enough to stop the next attack. But I have to stop and remind myself that it doesn't all sit on my shoulders, and I have come to learn to celebrate even the small actions. My hope as you listen to the panel is that is just the tip of the iceberg, all that they have accomplished after a tragedy. And I would also ask you to consider that action or achievement can also mean just waking up every day after personally experiencing an act of hate. I would first like to have our panel quickly introduce themselves and share a bit of their story. Heather?
My name is Heather Dearman, and 11 years ago in the city of Aurora, Colorado, my hometown, a gunman entered the theater with hate in his heart, and in that theater was my cousin Ashley, who was pregnant at the time, and with her 6-year-old daughter Veronica. Unfortunately, Ashley was shot and paralyzed, and she lost her unborn child and her 6-year-old daughter Veronica.
My name is Victoria Jabara. My brother Khalid Jabara was killed in a hate crime in 2016 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The man that lived next door had been harassing our family. We're from the Middle East, from Lebanon, harassing us, calling us names over a period of 5 years. He ran over my mother, went to jail, got out, and less than a month later, he killed my brother Khalid. So that's why we're here today.
Susheel?
Good afternoon. My name's Susheel Gupta. I was 12 years old when I lost my mother in Canada's largest terrorism incident. That's the 1985 bombing of Air India Flight 182, which killed 329 innocent individuals. We knew, of course, my mom and approximately 21 other people who were on that flight.
Thank you. Hamimah?
Tēnā koutou katoa, assalamu alaikum. I'm Hamimah. March 15 happened due to a coordinated effort to distort our faith to the point that someone in Australia felt justified to travel all the way to New Zealand to commit his evil act because Muslim lives were worthless to him. And his hatred took away 51 lives, injured 48, and profoundly impacted many others. They left behind 34 spouses, 92 children, and hundreds of siblings and family members. I lost friends, and I lost my best friend and my husband, Tuyan. He was the 51st, the last to pass on after fighting for 48 days at the ICU. And if it's okay, I would also like to share with you and thank you on behalf of the community in Christchurch, New Zealand. They would like me to express their gratitude and thank for all of your support, especially the Tree of Life congregant and community for the solidarity that you showed to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And Mohammed, you come to this panel with a slightly different background. If you could introduce yourself and share that.
Sure. So my name's Mohammed Hashim. I'm the executive director / CEO of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. We're a federal crown corporation, so we're part of the federal government, and we do a lot of work working with victims and with public policymakers addressing hate.
Thank you. And I'm just going to kind of go down the line like we did before, but if you can explain some of the work that you guys are doing after experiencing acts of hate, whether it be waking up every day or whether it be beginning something in your community. Heather, thank you.
For me, when the tragedy happened, obviously, our family was in a cloud like all families are when something like this happens. But in about 2015, I was wondering if a memorial had been built, so I joined the 720 Memorial Foundation. And our job was to honor the 13 lives lost, the first responders, our community, and the whole ripple effect that happened when the tragedy happened. And what we did is we went to booths at the city and asked people for donations. And at that time, you know, when Aurora happened, it wasn't as frequent as it is now, but it seemed to keep happening. And so we would have, well, people sent the city of Aurora banners with notes of love and support on it, and like lots of notes and crafts and everything like that. So when another shooting would happen, we would have a banner and send it to that community. Well, then, as soon as we were able to have a call to artists and build our memorial, our artist was inspired by the 1,000 paper cranes sent to our community. And our memorial in Aurora is 83 cranes, sculpted cranes in a garden, and 70 represent the injured, and the 13 in the middle represent the ones we lost. And so we wanted to pay the love forward with that symbol, and now we do the Paper Crane Peace Project, which I encourage you all to come to our table and write a note on an already folded crane, because we put those cranes on wreaths and send them to other communities. We also wanted to pay the love forward and advocate for the long-term healing of victims, because when a tragedy happens, everyone's there in the beginning, but 5 years out, 10 years out, it seems to go away, so we want to advocate for that. We also noticed that, like Michele said, being a survivor in action, it does take a lot of work, and sometimes, especially when you're triggered by another act of hate happening, you feel down and you don't know if you can go on. So we have gathered together different organizations, grassroots organizations out of other tragedies, to kind of support one another through peer support, but also through best practices. And we just have a lot of ideas of how we can all come together. And this Global Summit is our first one, and it's an example of exactly what we needed at the right time, because there's professionals here and experts here and other people who've been through what we are going through, who can now help us to continue our mission for best practices. And I'm really happy to be here. So thank you all for letting us talk about our organization and share our stories, because the survivor's voice is very important.
Thank you. Victoria, I see you shaking your head, agreeing, and it's so amazing from different parts of the country and different parts of the world. So go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to get Heather's number so we can talk about best practices and how we can continue to do this work. So my brother was killed in 2016. I had my daughter at the time was 3, and she was attending preschool at a synagogue nearby in Tulsa. And we had to think about, how do we tell the youngest in our community what happened? How do we share the story? They were affected. You know, my daughter's uncle had been killed in such a violent way. We came together, the teachers, the preschool teachers, and we came up with a social justice story hour, which would be targeted and for ages 0 to 5. And we know that those are the critical years of you know, everyone says, you know, kids are like sponges, their brains are like sponges. Well, why don't we talk about themes of empathy and inclusivity and tie it with song and storytelling? And so out of that came about these social justice story hours, a library where we housed those types of books on those themes, children's books. And from there we created the Khalid Jabara Foundation. And I'm just going to read kind of our vision and our mission. Really, you know, the mission of the Khalid Jabara Foundation is to live in a society free of hate, enriched by love, compassion, and empathy. And our mission is to make neighbors out of strangers by building kind communities free from hate. And the way we do that is through kindness or anti-hate education, as I was talking about the social justice story hours, and programming of that kind. Legal reform, working with organizations and law enforcement on sharing our story, and all of the points that failed us from the police department to district attorney. I mean, at all levels, we had been harassed, and we did all the things they told us to do, and still it resulted. No one was paying attention when we said this person is spewing hate, they're threatening us, and obviously it resulted in not only him killing my brother, but also running over my mother. So we work to share our story with law enforcement across the country, and then hate crime awareness and prevention as well, to do that work. It's taxing. We have a board of myself, a few others, and my brother and sister-in-law, and we all have full-time jobs, right? So we are spending our energy and our own money to try to do this work, to share our story so that we can actively combat hate. And attending Eradicate Hate this year has been so great to be put in front of practitioners and experts in this space, so we can learn how to kind of move our vision and mission forward and evolve the work that we're doing. So thank you again for having us.
Thank you so much. Susheel?
So the work that we're doing, our tragedy was 38 years ago, but what I witnessed is, at the time in '85, PTSD wasn't talked about. Victim support certainly wasn't where it is today, and I know there's still a lot of work that needs to be done, obviously, which is why many of us are doing that. In our case, it took 20 years for the case actually to, 15 years for it to get to trial, and then 5 years later for it to end, so 20 years after. So for decades, with our victims' families, even that quest for justice went on and on and on. That case resulted in acquittals, which the judge found was due to unacceptable negligence, quote unquote, by the law enforcement agencies and the intel agencies involved in investigating this case. Certainly the families were frustrated. I certainly was as well, but call it luck or good. I had a dad who, I'll say it, who smacked me when I needed to be smacked and kept me on that right path. And I'm gonna say I turned a lot of that justice and a lot of that cherishing of my mom into pursuing a career working in the justice system, taking out that anger and seeing that if there's, as many of us are probably frustrated with many aspects of these hate crimes, of terrorism, of policing, of the justice system. So I turned that. I became a federal prosecutor and was actually a prosecutor on one of Canada's first cases under the Anti-Terrorism Act, and I did that for about 12 years, and then into becoming in a judicial role working on human rights. But now, for the last 5 years, I actually work with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in our National Security and Counterterrorism section. And so in that work, I'm actually working side by side with investigators. But a big part of the work that I'm doing is responding to the needs of victims of hate and victims of terrorism. And so one major initiative that we're working on right now, and we've got victims directly involved, and there's a large group of us in policing agencies and federal government agencies involved in this, and that's establishing a national center to support victims of terrorism and mass fatality incidents. So I've seen these types of cowardly crimes that we've seen committed against many of us from the perspective of a victim, from the perspective of a prosecutor, now working in a law enforcement organization. And one thing I've learned is that there's a lot of, what I'll say is creating a playbook on the fly in the middle of a tragedy or at the beginning of a tragedy is a terrible way to do things. And if we could have something like a national center that not only looks after the support side, but also trains our folks who are there to protect us and serve us in that pre-planning part so they are better prepared for, let's face it, we know there will be other acts of hate, mass violence, and terrorism in the future, then they can be better prepared to respond to the needs of survivors, victims. And so that's much of the work that I'm doing. The families as well are also, many of us, it has been 38 years. You can imagine how old some of the victims' families have come over the years, but there are many of us who are still involved in advocacy work towards our government's education, to governments, to the public, as well as to law enforcement and security agencies. And then also we commit quite a bit of time to supporting what I would say current victims of tragedies because of that experience that we can draw upon over the last 38 years.
Thank you. Hamimah, you shared your story a little bit with me, but if you can talk about the things that you are working on?
So after March 15, I resonate with a lot of what you just said. It's all about, in your mummy mode, you just wake up, that is action. That is survival mode, wake up, attend to your children's needs, and that was it. But, different people heal differently. And so my way of healing is, I hope they forgive me, is to uproot my boys from Singapore and live back in New Zealand, Christchurch, and to try to contribute back to the community rebuilding. And I've been active since then in many agency-led and community-led activities. One of them is as the chair of the Collective Impact Board, which I feel like I would like to share because it's slightly different from what I've heard so far this last two days. It's a mechanism that enables public sector and community and non-government organizations to and the affected community to agree to a specific work program to provide ongoing wraparound services to the affected family members, the survivors, and the witnesses. So I felt like in my participation in conferences, that has been something that is quite different from the way we responded to the attacks. The other thing is also as the chair of the Sakinah Community Trust, and I'm here with my other trustee, Raisha, we were put together around October 2020, right after the sentencing, with three purposes. One was to decide what we're going to use the donation that we received for what community-led activities, initiatives, and we put also our vision and mission on two things. One is for the well-being and strengthening of the community, not just the Muslim community, but the community with the wider community, the interfaith community, the different culture, the diverse culture. And the other thing is about contributing to social cohesion and trying to effect change in that sense, to contribute to the, hopefully, national strategy to bring community to a healing. Our Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, then Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, now Dame Jacinda Ardern, she talked about maybe New Zealand could be the nation that finds the cure for hatred, and we are inspired to contribute to that. So one of the things that has helped us in our healing was the outpouring of compassion and solidarity that we felt, and we wanted to reconnect to that. We wanted to bring the nation, the community, back to that feeling after March 15, when we saw millions of people, not just in New Zealand, but all over the world, including yourselves, I'm sure, who stood by us and stood in solidarity with us. We want to make sure that we rekindle that. We want to make sure that we honor and we preserve that. And so we initiated a Unity Week that starts from March 15, which is also the United Nations Combat Islamophobia Day, and of course our anniversary, and it lasts till March 21st, which is the United Nations Elimination of Racial Discrimination Day. And within that week, we put up many initiatives, interfaith, intercultural, diverse people working together, to set up events and activities to increase awareness and the importance of unity. And we've specifically called it Unity Week and not some other name. We recognize that there are many examples of hurt and harm, both historically and ongoing, that have broken trust between peoples and make it hard for some of us to trust each other. We do not seek to belittle or diminish that hurt. We ask people to trust humanity and the power of unity, but to do this in our little way and in our own time. And most importantly, the Sakinah Community Trust is made up of 7 women who have lost their loved ones, widows, mothers, daughters, sister. For us, it's about wanting a future where our children, they and their peers, feel they belong, can be their authentic selves, and empowered to advocate for each other, regardless of their physical appearance, physical attributes, ethnic identities, skin color, ideological affiliation. That's our long-term vision, and hopefully we can succeed with your support and prayers, inshallah.
Thank you so much. And Mohammed, we spoke of what brought you to this work, and if you could talk a little bit about that and the work that you do.
Yeah, I think that when we think about what drives us in this work, for me, after 9/11, we saw a sharp rise in hate towards Muslims right across Canada. Like people, whenever ISIS would do something in France, we would get hate crimes in Toronto. Women would be attacked in the streets, mosques would be vandalized, firebombed. So for many years, I, for some odd reason, fell into this role of becoming a bit of a crisis manager for the community. So whenever something happened, they needed to talk to police, or they needed to talk to community organizations, or to news media, or something happened and trucks of media are showing up, call Mohammed, they'll come help you out. So I took on that role for, I don't know how it happened, but it just ended up happening. So on January 29, 2017, I got a call from the National Council of Canadian Muslims, and Amir Al-Ghawabi, our special envoy in Islamophobia currently right now, called me. She used to work there, and said, there's been a shooting in Quebec City. Can you please drop everything that you're doing and head over there now? So the next morning, I ended up in Quebec City, and I took the cab right straight to the mosque to meet with board members of the mosque. And as soon as I got out of the cab, you could see the mosque is on top of a hill, and it's winter time, so there's snow on the ground, and you can see people's footsteps, like bare feet, because everybody left while praying and they didn't have their shoes on, so they were running outside bare feet, and there was blood even on the snow outside of the mosque. And I met with an enormous amount of victims, people who were looking for their, where's my dad? Where's my uncle? Do you know where anybody is? And I'm like, I'll find out. I'll get back to you. Let's help you out. And then one thing that really kind of just disturbed me that day, which kind of motivates me to this day in terms of how do we present solutions on hate, is there was a 6-year-old girl who was right outside the mosque with her mom, and they were there to pick up the car that was left because the night before, when the shooting was happening, the father was in the mosque. And the little girl, who was 6 at the time, was holding onto her shoulder, and I asked her, why was her shoulder hurting? And she said that when the gunman came into the mosque, now this is her saying she was in the mosque when it happened. She was playing at the back of the mosque like all kids do typically, making noises and annoying the people who are praying. But that's what kids do, and that's what she was doing. And when the gunman came in, while she's running around playing with her friends, he started shooting. She saw her own father get shot in the back. The guys at the back of the mosque saw her and jumped on top of her. And the reason why her shoulder was hurting is because they had kind of crushed her to shield her from bullets. The gunman turned the gun and pointed it to her and pulled the trigger. And in that moment, maybe it was divine intervention, but he ran out of bullets. She saw somebody shoot her and not be able to kill her. And I think about and that night, there was a congregation that was brought together by policing in the community. And the police said a number of things. Well, we're going to protect you this way, or we're going to do this, or we're going to do that. And what I knew from before was that there was a pig's head left at that exact same mosque with cellophane wrapped in front of it. And they did nothing. I'm not blaming the police for not doing anything. But I know that there was, knowing now what I know now, and seeing how some of the incredible police officers who really go out of their way to help communities be better prepared in situations like this. And I think about all the ways that that mosque could have been helped in advance. And I think about all the ways that like there just could have been things that they were just better prepared to have dealt with the situation. So 6 men did not need to lose their lives. 17 more did not need to be injured. And people who are 6 years old don't need to explain how they were almost shot to death. In 2020, I was hired by the federal government to lead the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. We're a federal crown corporation, so we're part of the federal government, but we have independence where they give us their money, but we don't have to answer to them. We answer directly to Parliament, but the government can't direct us in our operations. And our organization does a variety of things. We help contribute to the Canadian government's Canadian anti-racism strategy, the Canadian Action Plan on Combating Hate, the modernizing of employment equity, which is your affirmative action environment, the Black Canadian Justice Strategy, and the Online Safety Bill. These are all legislative pieces that are within the federal ecosystem that we have a very hands-on role in supporting. We also do funding. We work with community organizations that we give supports to find out innovative ways that they can address hate locally. And in 2022, we reached out to the RCMP, which is kind of like your FBI equivalent, I think. And we said, how do we create a task force to look at hate crimes across this country and come up with national standards across the board? There's 178 police of jurisdiction, out of which roughly 20 have hate crimes units or an investigator of some sort dedicated towards hate. So only a fraction of the policing community is actually looking at hate in a more tangible way. And actually, we have a number of people from our task force here. We have Sarah Thompson here from the Toronto Metropolitan University. We have Karen Bissell from the Toronto Police Services, and Faraz Ismail here from the Peel Police Services, all incredible experts in dealing with hate. We literally took the best brains across Canada and we put them together on a task force. And it's not just about like anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, anti-Black hate, or anti-Indigenous hate, or anti-Asian hate. It's about how do we have the system respond collectively right across the board with standards that are equal for everybody. And one of the things that I'm really proud of is that I'm sure many of you had heard in London, Ontario, not last year, the year before, somebody drove into the Afzal family and killed 4 people. And it was a tremendously horrific event. And the event sparked a national conversation around how to deal with Islamophobia. And part of what haunts me was, one of my colleagues was out in London, and she said that there was a 12-year-old girl who was killed in that car attack. And the school children who were students with her got very minimal mental health supports throughout the process. And there was a ton of PTSD that happened afterwards with very little supports. And this month, the trial of the accused has started. And day after tomorrow, we're going to be announcing with the federal minister an infusion of funds to be able to create mental health supports for victims of hate. So we're really proud of being able to support victims, but also create public policy and new ways of innovating to support victims and policing and the judicial system.
Thank you so much. Somebody had mentioned this at the beginning, a question that should take you 45 minutes. I would ask you each to take a minute and explain your best hopes for future response to hate crimes.
For me, my roots always go back to how my 5 children felt when the tragedy happened, and they had lost hope and they were scared of the world. And I just know that when our community started receiving all of the love and the support that they did, that I wanted to make it my mission to prove to them that there was more love in the world than hate. And it's just the small, simple act of connecting with another human being, connecting in your trauma, and connecting and being vulnerable and open, and just sharing a space in your heart to just look at one another and be kind And even if it's just a stranger that you meet in the hallway or someone that you're walking by on the street and they look kind of sad, I would hope that everyone just makes it a promise to themselves that they just give a smile, because any small act of kindness can have a huge ripple effect of positivity and love. And so I hope for the future that, I know everyone here believes in that, but I would wish that for the world, that everyone could be kind to one another.
Thank you. Victoria?
Yeah, I think what gives me hope is the work that we're doing, right? In this room, of course, with the foundation that my family and I have, a lot of the reform work, I didn't mention this earlier, it slipped my mind, but it's one of our most things that we're most proud of is the passing of the Jabara Hire No Hate Act, which was signed was signed by President Biden in 2021. And if you don't know what that is, it really is, our case was a clear-cut hate crime, and it wasn't registered in the federal hate crime database. And Heather Heyer, who the bill is named also after, who was killed in Charlottesville by white supremacists exactly 1 year after my brother was killed. The bill seeks to, her case wasn't registered either, so we thought, we have a data problem. No one, how do we know if we truly have, a problem with hate crimes? How are we looking at the right data? Is the data correct? And so the passing of that bill gives us hope. Now, there's so much more to do. The bill really provides incentives for community organizations, law enforcement, et cetera, to register hate crimes on a federal level so that we can get an accurate picture and take steps based on the data. So that gives me hope that the administration was listening and we were able to pass that bill through. Another thing that gives me hope is, of course, looking at my daughter, who's, we have these conversations, we go to social justice story hours. Her mantra is peace begins with me. And starting with the youngest in our communities, I think that's how we have to start actively combating hate. So yeah, those are.
Thank you. Susheel?
Your question about what gives me hope?
A quick answer.
Pardon me?
A quick answer.
A quick answer. I guess, what gives me hope is seeing all of us together. This dialogue is occurring. I can say on 38 years of going through this, I'm seeing change, and that gives me hope that we must continue together, create this dialogue, continue this dialogue, and working together.
Well, the fact that the legacy, we were able to contribute to a legacy post-March 15 and associate that with the positivity, the positive outcome, again, the reconnection to that compassion that we saw, that gave me hope that humanity, will come to the aid of those in need and when they are in need. For me as well, in terms of the response, what would give me hope is, well, hopefully nothing of this happens again, but when it does happen, to have your coordinated, victim-centered, all the terms that you guys have been throwing out, coordinated, victim-centered, faith-based, culturally affirming response for survivors. In fact, I feel like, when I was listening to everybody, if at that moment when I had to go through that, no one came to me and said, how can we help you? But rather said, this is what you need. That's something that I needed. Someone to tell me what you need to think about, what rights you have, and what you need to think about. And I'm so glad to hear all the work groups doing all these best practices, not bad practices. That would give me hope. And then in terms of the recovery, making sure that, these dates are etched forever in the calendars of ministries of education, ministries of health, the government, where it becomes a national observance, to keep that positivity going while recognizing that there is still hate going on in the world, but to amplify that instead. I hope that answers the question.
Mohammed, and then
Yeah, I would just say, I think that we have an incredible team, an ecosystem in Canada of people who are taking phenomenal responsibility to address hate. Our federal government, many provincial governments, many municipalities, everybody on our task force, everybody on our staff, where I feel like there's so many people who are taking such great responsibility of this that it has to, in a world that's constantly trying to polarize and divide us, I think like the people that I see around us have such inertia and strength that it gives me tremendous hope. And there's one other thing that really, I didn't realize this until just now, but like this panel itself is a testament to how hate loses. Like hate is done, like hateful acts are done to diminish your self-worth, to tell you that you don't belong, to tell you that you are not good enough, or that like your identity is not respected, or simply that you shouldn't exist. But the testament of this panel here is kind of a big FU to that. Because it's basically saying that we have the strength here to not only survive, but push back against that, and that will defeat hate.
Thank you. And I would just like to end by saying I kind of kept my story. Okay. After my brothers were killed, Achieva, who helped with their work and their housing, started a campaign that's called Love Like the Boys. And Cecil and David, as I mentioned, were special needs. And they didn't know hate, they didn't know color, race, religion. They loved everybody. Both of them were social, they cared about people. And we all spoke about this, just the simple act of kindness. I think people brush it off, but what I've really learned is if you do something kind, hate tries to be louder, and we need to be louder with the good in the world. So I do encourage everybody to be kind to one another, smile at people, ask how their day is going. I think that's more important than we realize. And to all of you that didn't choose to be a part of this community that are in the room, as survivors, I see you, and I know you have valuable stories to tell as well. Thank you all.
Thank you.